minutes late here. Um, Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brianna and I'm with the Sierra Club Iowa chapter. And thank you for joining our weekly Lunch and Learns. We do this every Friday at noon. We go live with an environmentally focused topic, bringing in experts and advocates to share their knowledge and insights. And today we'll be talking about nuclear energy with medical and nuclear experts. Next Era Energy has proposed a project that will have long-lasting consequences for Iowa's energy future. They want to restart the Duane Arnold Nuclear Plant, which has been in decommissioning mode since 2020 and was first opened in 1975. To make this happen, Next Era asked federal regulators to allow them to abandon three planned solar projects and shift those connections over to nuclear instead. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about that with three incredible guests. And first up, we have Dr. Maureen McCue, MD and PhD, now retired, but has worked globally as a researcher, teacher, and physician for over 40 years. She has helped found and work within the University of Iowa Global Health Studies program and the Center for Human Rights. She provided direct service as a clinician and medical doctor director for a local women's clinic and coordinated activities for Physicians for Social Responsibility Iowa chapter for many years. All her endeavors, personal and professional, have focused on the human right to health within a life-supporting, sustainable planet, including addressing concerns about the health impacts of militarism, nuclear proliferation, energy policy, climate disruption, food, and women's and disability rights. Her current life is devoted to managing of 14 acres of flowers, animals, and year-round food production, and Michael, her dependent adult child. She is the author of two books exploring local and global connections and co-produced the 2007 award-winning film Healing Iraq, A Tale of Two Doctors. And so we'll save questions until the end. But with that, I will hand it over to you, Maureen.
Thank you, Brianna. Do I just speak from my little corner or do I suddenly appear?
Yep, so I am sharing and it's presenter view, so whoever's speaking. So you are good. So I'll have you share
Oh,
your screen.
okay. Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who's joining us. As Brianna has implied, this is a really critical issue about which there's been very little discussion in the public realm. And I think it's really time that we get there. So I was going to, we could do this all when when we practiced. Nothing like being part of the older crowd who always has to remember how we do all these things. Anyway, as mentioned, they have now received an approval to reopen this plant. And it's really only the third plant in Iowa to even be considered, much less have any of them actually accomplished a start safely. In essence, we're in real uncharted territory here. So it's really vital, I think, before we say anything about Duane Arnold in particular, to recognize that despite any of the geographical, structural, or temporal differences of individual nuclear power plants anywhere, their inherent risks, their harms, their hidden, indirect, and unintended consequences are all similar and very real. Whether we're talking about older reactors or even the new proposed exciting small nuclear reactors, they all carry the same considerations. So it worked before. This go down, page down. Now it's not. How do I make it? There we go. Okay. So I did want to mention, because it is never ever talked about, but that the harms that are obscured, they're really obscured harms. They begin far away and long before we're talking about Iowa. We can't forget, or we shouldn't forget, that the uranium miners, the millers, the workers all along this route, they find, they refine and process the rocks for future, and they leave piles of radioactive tailings and waste. And the impacts on their health are unfortunately invisible to Iowans. They belong, for the most part, to already impoverished communities. They're left to protect themselves and their communities while managing the waste from their work. So they suffer increased poverty and illness while we pursue our new and exciting future. And as has already been mentioned and will be mentioned and reminded you again, Duane Arnold, like all nuclear power plants, will generate dangerous emissions despite all of the hoopla. I'm sorry. You know what? I got stuck. Um, there, these risks by all of these plants are borne by the natural environment, another thing that we forget, and those who benefit least from this technology. Duane Arnold, like all operating nuclear plants, will, as I mentioned, regularly emit small quantities of dangerous emissions. Nuclear energy is not zero emission, it is not carbon free. Rather, it has some unique hidden ways of affecting the climate. Nuclear waste heat indirectly heats the planet through its heating of the important bodies of water when it's operating, as well as while attending to its own energy and electrical needs at every step in its life cycle from beginning to end. The release, as mentioned here, of Krypton 85, which I find kind of interesting given the strange gaming and movie world we live in, actually does occur later during the reprocessing of some of the fuel rods that are part of the waste pile from the plant. Um, Importantly, never forget that a nuclear power plant, like almost all of the fossil fuel plants, um, require and divert water. They pollute water. And these are real harms too, because within that heated water, which is harmful to the environment, we're also releasing tritium. And the combination is deadly to surrounding nature. And most important, I think, to remember is that our increasingly changing climate means nuclear becomes unreliable, especially during powerful windstorms, high heat, drought, which are, as we know, three regular Iowa meteorologic conditions. During such difficult weather occurrences, reactors are forced to shut down. So also important to recall is that nuclear power is not a bargain. Multiple sources, you can check them out over the years, show that right up to ones from this year, confirm that nuclear power is the most costly. Numerous factors go into all of these calculations beyond this, short video, short Zoom, but this trend has not changed at all over time. Renewables, on the other hand, can quickly produce gigawatts without cost overruns. They safely produce um, their energy. And for nuclear, whether it's de novo or proposed, is in this restarted mothball unit, um, to get it to produce gigawatts will take years with potentially large cost overruns. Um, and so it really doesn't compare favorably at all to that which was interrupted to restart nuclear. All nuclear power plants, this is probably the most important thing that we should never ever forget, is that all nuclear power plants produce copious amounts of unmanageable forever waste. There is no safe solution to nuclear waste. It's also known as spent nuclear fuel. It remains hot, radioactive, and deadly for millennia. The waste generated at nuclear power plants must be stored, must be isolated, must be protected for thousands of years. This onerous necessity has remained unsolved and ignored to date. Nuclear power, the other thing important, the third, I think, really important ignored reality is that nuclear power plants provide the concentrated nuclear materials that are required for nuclear weapons and the nuclear navy with which to deliver them. And we're now living in such a nuclear unstable world. I think overlooking this reality is another difficult thing for all of us. Any nuclear reactor in that case is really an attractive target to terrorists. And we learn over and over again that defensive and surveillance systems can be breached by clever hackers, by activists and terrorists, including those who would just cut off power to continue cooling the waste products. Nowadays, we keep hearing about Ukraine and Russia attacks on the energy in both their countries required for each other's reactors. It's a lesson we need to heed and consider. Also, of course, what we don't know is that aging of original building materials anywhere risk unplanned structural failures. Duane Arnold functioned as a nuclear power plant from early 75 to late 2020, really over 45 years, has been idled for 5 years. Best estimates by nuclear engineers are for about 50 years of useful, safe function. This is one of the reasons we're now hearing all the hoopla for the small modular reactors, because this is an unavoidable reality of these older plants. So a final question I would have to ask in my little piece of time here is, when something goes wrong, who would be responsible for any of the adverse consequences? Is a company going to be responsible? Is the community going to be responsible? We all, as a population, endure a certain level of psychological and spiritual cost because of our lack of engagement with or consent to products and their waste, including the energy that we're talking about producing. We need to ask who really needs or benefits from the variety, the instantaneous nature, the unexamined costs for the resources to support so much consumption, so much energy, the cloud, the unchecked surveillance of all aspects of our modern lives. These unperceived harms of this energy intersect with so many of the other risks and harms we're already enduring without really consenting. When you think about so many toxic and disruptive materials, think plastic just for one. Including the way energy development degrades the natural habitats. It's caused the extinction of other animals that are part of our life support. I just feel we need to question these things, because if we're doomed to remain unable to ask or contemplate this question, we're doomed to follow up and experience the risks and harms that I've mentioned. I think that Iowans must conduct cost-benefit analysis of nuclear versus renewables, including the cost to our health, our environment, and long-term nuclear waste storage, as well as the simple potential cost overruns resulting from Lynn County providing money to Duane Arnold, and compare these with the much lower costs to installing all renewables instead. Iowa's already a leader in clean renewables. Now is the time to continue that trend and not go back to the dangerous past. Thank you. That's it. Those are my slides. Comments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that insight. And so with that, I'll have you stop sharing, and Joseph will hand it over to you. He is the executive director of the Radiation and Public Health Project, where he has worked for over 20 years. He is a nationally recognized expert on health risks of exposure to radiation from nuclear reactors and weapons. He has published 43 medical journal articles, 4 books, and dozens of editorials and letters. Joseph directed the only U.S. study measuring in-body radiation near nuclear plants through strontium-90 testing and has provided testimony to more than 20 government agencies. His work has been featured in major outlets including the New York Times, USA Today, CNN, and Fox News, and has been highlighted in several documentaries. He holds a Master's of Public Health from the University of North Carolina, along with an MBA from Fordham University in New York. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Brianna, and thank you for this opportunity. Um, from a public health standpoint, the idea of reopening the Duane Arnold plant makes very little sense. I mean, really, the idea of reopening a closed plant has never occurred in the United States before, and now there are proposals to open several plants that have been permanently closed, in addition to building many new reactors. In fact, in 2023, the US joined with 30 other countries in signing a pledge to triple the electrical output from nuclear power plants by 2050, in 25 years. And in trying to reach this goal, the nuclear industry and the government have been making a number of claims which are just plain false. I hope you can see this, this screen. All right, the first claim, and some of this is going to be a repetition of what Maureen just said. But one claim is that nuclear power does not contribute to global warming. What the industry and government are doing is taking the truth and fudging it. Yes, carbon, there's more carbon that comes out of coal plants and natural gas plants, but reactors do emit some greenhouse gas. Maureen mentioned several, krypton 85 and tritium. Another one is carbon 14. That name should tell you that it does release carbon on a routine basis into the environment. And these are their records must be kept of how much actually goes into the environment of each plant operator. The second point is that, as Maureen said, uranium is used as the fuel in nuclear power plants, okay? And what happens is uranium-235 atoms are split, which do two things: create high heat, which is turned into electricity, and produce over 100 radioactive waste products. These radioactive products, which are either released into the atmosphere and water, or are stored. Uranium-235 doesn't occur on its own. There is a lengthy process beginning with uranium mining, and then milling, and fabrication, and enrichment, and purification. All of this involves transportation. All of these are enormous users of greenhouse gases, something that the industry and government leaders conveniently ignore. The third thing I'll mention is that every reactor is on uses a body of water and must use enormous amounts of water every day, must pump in thousands of gallons of water to cool the reactor core, to cool the radioactivity so that there won't be a meltdown. What happens is every day after water is used, it is returned to that body of water. In Duane Arnold's case, it is the Cedar River. The temperatures of this water are quite high. They're between 85 and 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a river, depending on the time of year, is much lower than that. In the summer, the water temperature can probably reach around 70, but in the winter, very often the 40s and even the 30s is the temperature. And this heated water is harmful to any cold-blooded aquatic species, including fish. It harms, this hot water harms and kills many fish, something also that is ignored. All right, so that is the greenhouse gas issue. The second claim that's made is nuclear power is a zero emission source of electricity. It's emission free. Absolutely incorrect. As Maureen mentioned, and I mentioned, the reactors generate over 100 radioactive chemicals. These are chemicals that do not exist in nature. The only other way to find the place where you find these chemicals are when an atomic bomb explodes, again, by splitting uranium atoms. All of these are harmful, of course, carcinogenic. As Maureen said, most of these metal particles and gases are stored at each plant as waste. 70 years ago, there were plans to get a single repository, a single location for all plants to store the waste. We still don't have one because they have not found a safe way to transport and to keep the radioactivity. So each plant is stuck with these gigantic amounts of waste. Duane Arnold has the equivalent of almost what was released at the Chernobyl catastrophic meltdown in 1986. And then the final thing is that whatever portion of these particles and gases that aren't stored are released into the air and to the water routinely, and thus these chemicals get into the human body through the food chain. And that's where, because Duane Arnold has not had a major meltdown, that's where the health issue was raised, and that gets into claim number 3, which we see all of that. Nuclear power is a safe way to create energy. It is certainly not safe. And to do this, I'm going to go to another slide. I'm going to stop sharing one and replace it with another one. All right, question 1. When Duane Arnold operated, what happened to local cancer rates? Although radioactivity harms every human, it is especially harmful when the exposure comes early in life, during the fetal period, during the infant period, to young children and to young adults. Take a look at the graph. There's 3 graphs here, but the one on the right-hand side is an analysis of the trend in the local rate of new cancers in people under 40 years old in the 2 counties closest to Duane Arnold, Benton and Lynn. Okay, the blue bar shows that in the 6 years before Duane Arnold opened, the local rate was 6% below the state. Okay, the middle bar, the brown bar, shows that in the first 23 years it operated, instead of being below the state, the local rate was several points above the state. And the last one shows that in the most recent 23 years of operation, the The local rate of cancer in children, adolescents, and young adults was 12% above the US. Now, we went from -6% to plus 12%. What does that mean in terms of human numbers? Well, in those 46 years that Duane Arnold operated, in those two counties, just over 3,000 young people were diagnosed with cancer. If the blue bar had continued after Duane Arnold opened, about 500 fewer cancers in children and in young adults would have been diagnosed. All right, that's what happened during operation of Duane Arnold. Now, the next question is, okay, Duane Arnold closed in late 2020. What has happened to local health since shutdown? Well, we have done some research looking at this question, not just for Duane Arnold, but for a number of nuclear plants that closed relatively recently. And we look specifically at infant deaths. Okay, as I said, the exposures to radioactivity are much more harmful to the health of the fetus and the infant than they are for older persons. This graph shows what happened in the 5 years to the infant death rate. You know, these are infants dying before age 1. In the 5 years before shutdown and in the period after shutdown. There are 7 plants here. The blue bar shows the local change in infant death rate, and the brown bar shows the national change. And where is Duane Arnold? Duane Arnold is the second group of bars here. Duane Arnold's infant death rate in the 4 years after it shut down, 21 through 24, dropped 18%, whereas in the United States, it only dropped 2%. And as you see, there's some other reactors, it dropped much more than that, some as high as 25%. And as you see also that the blue bar is larger than the brown bars near every plant. In other words, the local rate dropped more drastically than the national rate. In addition to infant mortality, we also looked at what else happened to infant health in the 4 years after Duane Arnold closed. All right, the first set of bars here, we just did infant mortality. Okay, there's the local rate, went down 18%. The middle one is the all other counties in Iowa, aside from Johnson and Lynn County, only went down 9%, and there's the national rate down about 2%. In the middle, we have premature births, babies who were born before the expected full 9-month period. And you can see that the two counties, Johnson and Lynn, the rate went down 20%, and in the rest of Iowa, it actually went up 5%, and with no change in the US. This is major. And the last one is low weight births, babies born below 2.2 pounds. Down 15% near Duane Arnold, and really very little change in the rest of Iowa and the United States. These data are strong evidence that when you operate a nuclear plant, the risk to health increases, and when you shut it, it decreases. And that alone should be enough to not proceed with restart of Duane Arnold, in addition to other issues such as expenses. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to answer your questions later.
Awesome. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Awesome. Thank you so much, Joseph. All of that data was is super impactful on me. So I hope everybody else is really looking at that, the health impacts. Um, and last but not least, we have Dr. John Rachow. Oh man, I know we talked about this, and I'll let you introduce yourself because now I know I'm gonna butcher the name, even though I should know it. But he holds a doctorate in chemical engineering, and his medical training was in internal medicine, rheumatology, and geriatrics. He has lived in eastern Iowa since 1988 and has been active in the PSR Iowa chapter since 2002. Was on the National Physicians for Social Responsibility Board from 2006 to 2022 and served as the national board president in 2011 and 2017. He co-founded the PSR Radiation and Health Committee in 2011, soon after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant meltdown. He continues to have special interest in the threat of natural disasters due to nuclear power stations and spent nuclear waste stored on site. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Dr. John.
Yeah. All you have to remember is Johnny Rocco. You can also, on my first meeting with my current wife many years ago, I was recognized as Dr. Doom and Gloom. So let me see if I can get this, my little screen share to work. And is that working?
Not yet.
Okay, well, it looks like it does. So I'm evidently not sharing.
Not yet, no.
There you go.
But they're not seeing it. So I'm going back to my Zoom screen. Sharing screen one. Share. How's that?
There we go. Yes.
Okay. So Dr. Doom and Gloom was wondering what led to the switching from nuclear power to a solar plan for the Duane Arnold site, and then suddenly back to, oh, we're going to restart it. And I suppose not only is money the root of all evil, the one thing that big money wants is more money, and that seems to be a trend that's evident in the history that I could uncover. Interestingly, the power plant, the Duane Arnold power plant, was started, I don't know, 47 years ago, and over the years was owned by different companies and shareholders and groups over the years. And most recently, it's been NextEra Energy Resources. And NextEra had decided that the plant was done. It was time to decommission it. Went through the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to get decommissioning approved. And the decommissioning was to begin October 2020. However, the plant kept running, and in August of 2020, 2 months before decommissioning, the derecho went through and shut down the plant and destroyed, well, damaged severely, a cooling tower. So the plant had to be put in emergency shutdown and was not restarted. And the NextEra went ahead with the decommissioning after that. And then about a year ago or so, I think they announced that they were going to put up a industrial scale solar farm on the property. And I thought that was actually a breath of fresh air. But a new administration in the United States came into power in late 2024, was elected. And what do you know? January 2025, NextEra puts in an application to the NRC to recommission and bring back online the shuttered Duane Arnold Power Plant. And back in 2022, in May, they had actually removed the last hot spent nuclear fuel from the cooling pools and put them into dry cask storage. And so now all of the energy, spent nuclear waste, which is highly radioactive and will remain so for approximately the next 1,000 millennia, that's 1,000,000 years, will sit there on the pad, and it is hundreds of thousands of tons in its dry cask storage. Relatively safe, but it's an intermittent storage. Permanent storage was promised by the United States to get nuclear power started in the first place many decades ago. However, the industry said, no, you got to do something with the waste. And so they tried to find a permanent repository, and you remember the Yucca Mountain nonsense. It was finally decided they didn't and couldn't, so they agreed to pay, this is more money, for big money, pay every plant to continue to store the spent nuclear fuel in dry cask storage. So suddenly they switched the beginning of this year, applied for to recommit to restart the plant, and conveniently, an executive order from the new president in May of this year decided to streamline the NRC. And I think gutting is a better word. They wanted to my pictures are not advancing. There we go. And so resurrections always attract a lot of attention. And this executive order from the president came out in May of this year to streamline the NRC. One thing was, first of all, applications had to be decided within 18 months instead of the many years that were required in the past. And actually, the idea of safe radiation, it's
not, no, this is what they see. This is what they see.
oh, okay.
So I don't know why it's not advancing. Maybe just turn it on.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
It
You see-
advanced. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep,
now-
we do.
Resurrections always attract a lot of attention. So not only was the evaluation of applications by the industry, the NRC could not fully investigate, and they were required to make a decision in 18 months. The second thing is that the idea of health limits for radiation was kind of said this is an unnecessary set of regulations. And so they eliminated some of the health regulations, limits, and decided to ordered that the theory, which is not a theory, that any radiation was harmful. And this linear no harm theory is actually pretty well scientifically established that all the way down to zero, any radiation increases risk of risk to health. And it's worst in the fetus, pretty bad in children, bad in women, and least severe in adult males, which is why the NRC or the radiation safety gurus often use the standard male as the object of possible injury from radiation. So that it makes it very easy for the plants to restart, be approved quickly. And as it stands, the plant is to come online in late 2028, 3 years from now. That's their schedule. Of course, there has to be a lot of repairs, new equipment brought in, new plans that need to be approved and inspected by the NRC and so on. And the track record of getting new nuclear plants built is incredible, average of 10 to 11 years. And in this country, those delays have actually been longer than that and very expensive, the delays. So it's not certain whether that schedule can be met or not, but that's currently the plan. And bright, shiny things are irresistible. And it seems like the business community locally is very enthusiastic about this reopening of the plant. So we'll see. We're going to have to stand by and cross our fingers and remember that the best laid schemes of mice and men gang off to gley. So that's it. Money, money, money.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, money runs the world. So we have to fight where we can. And so with that, I will open it up for questions. I do have one from Sarah. She asked, you mentioned the derecho was the reason for Duane Arnold closing. Kind of what does climate change, how does it affect nuclear power, moving forward if climate change continues to get worse?
Is the question directed to anyone in particular?
I assume you, John, since you talked about the derecho, but it's open to any of you.
Okay, well, rephrase or can you say the question again?
Yes, how will climate change continue to affect nuclear power, especially considering the derecho basically took out Duane Arnold?
Well, Joseph referred to one episode where the water was too warm coming out of the plants, heating the rivers and killing the fish. Well, climate change is doing a pretty good job of heating the waters. And from time to time, some plants on the Ohio River have had to shut down in recent years simply because the water temperature got up to 110 degrees, which is the threshold that the water can't be used for cooling for the power plant, and the power plants would have to be shut. And you can imagine what that kind of temperature does to fish. I have an acquaintance who's a champion fisherman nationally, and there was a tremendous kill off of the very large catfish in the Ohio River. And so climate change itself is heating the water, heating the atmosphere, and messing with weather. Derechos are more common. Damage from hurricanes is impressive. And power plant in Florida was severely damaged by a hurricane a few years ago.
Can I say something else?
Yeah.
Regarding water, Iowa has intermittent flooding and intermittent droughts. And so when you're talking about hot water and drought, that just increases that vulnerability right there. And we do have increasing windstorms. The one that struck several years ago was a shock to everyone, but then we had another one not too long after. And so while we're not in a real earthquake prone zone like what happened in Japan, but we do definitely see more and worse tornadoes, and we do see definitely worse heat and definitely worse flooding. All of these will have impacts on any nuclear power plants that are started here, as well as our other sources of energy for that matter. So why add to the problem when we know the problem's already there?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Maureen said. You mentioned earthquakes. The 2011 major meltdown at the Fukushima plant in Japan was one of the two worst, perhaps environmental disasters in history. The other one was Chernobyl. 3 reactor cores melted down and a waste pool melted down. And to this day, 14 years later, the plant is still not under control. It is still leaking radioactivity into the Pacific Ocean. Why did Fukushima have a meltdown? Well, that area and really most of Japan is built on faults that are susceptible to earthquakes. The engineers believe that they had made it earthquake proof. Well, they were wrong. And here, closer to home here in the United States, maybe not Iowa, but a number of nuclear plants are built on faults. One I'll point out is the only last operating nuclear plant in California called Diablo Canyon. It is in Northern California in San Luis Obispo County, and it was scheduled to be shut down this year and last year, the 2 reactors, but the governor of the state, Gavin Newsom, made sure that a law was passed to get rid of the agreement to shut down, and with the help of, now it's up to $2 billion, and it's probably going to be more. That reactor is going to, those reactors are going to operate 5 years and probably 20 more years, right over that fault. We're flirting with really bad trouble that we had never seen before in the United States here by keeping these plants open.
And I do want to add, sorry.
The flooding in 2011 took out permanently 2 nuclear power plants on Iowa's other river, in Omaha and in southeast Iowa, Fort Calhoun and the Omaha plant. They were flooded, inundated, and could not be ever recovered or restarted. We'll have to see if they come back with a plan to restart those. But floods, tsunamis, hurricanes, earthquakes, those are high catastrophic events that have relatively low probability of happening at any given place. And so that's part of the president's new executive order, is that high catastrophic but low probability events don't need to be planned for or mitigated in advance.
And again, we have the answer already. If an earthquake affects a wind farm or a solar farm, well, there's damage, but there's no release of this highly toxic radioactivity. You just rebuild the windmills or the solar panels.
Yes, great answers. Thank you. And I did want to add one thing that the reactor in the Duane Arnold power plant is the same that was in the Fukushima one. So there is a big threat there. And John, I'll have you stop sharing your screen too when you get a chance. And we have a couple more questions here. Um, how do so Paul asked, they said they've been following kind of this story, and the opponents seem to be on the losing battle. And they were asking, how do we articulate some of the risks you guys have all mentioned here today in a way that is more persuasive to the general audience and maybe the elected officials?
I think every one of us would come up with a little bit different answer. But I think really reinforcing the intersection between our changing climate and the increasing risks to expensive power plants. I think combining the cost issue with the climate change issue is an important one to reiterate. I think right now the people within the solar and the wind industry are so much playing defense, and they're kind of operating in the background, that I do think it's important for others, to take up the banner and speak to this. Um, but people, as John started out with, money talks, and so to talk about throwing good money after bad seems to me at least to be one of the ways that people are captured. The other is really trying to reach out to the people who are in the most vulnerable position, i.e. those around the Palo area. They right now see it as a boon to their economy, and we really have to bring up the fact that that's a false promise. It may involve some jobs, which are important, obviously, to anyone's status and well-being, but at the other hand, what are you risking? And so we have to have money against money kind of conversations, and risk against risk, I think, as the conversations.
I think the key is to make sure that the discussion is moved down to the human level. Now, we have done 35 press conferences over the years. At a number of them, we have included people who lived near a nuclear plant, the one that we've done the study about, who, for example, one is a woman, Connecticut, who had thyroid disease. She had 3 daughters, and each of them was diagnosed with thyroid cancer early in adulthood. All right, and we know that thyroid cancer is very sensitive to radioactivity. We've had a number of parents of children who have developed cancer, and have been looking whether the child, in some cases the child died, in other cases it lived but had to go through this grueling treatment. And in each case, the parents said, we've been asking doctors multiple times what could have caused it, and we're not getting any answers. All right, we think this is one of the, and we, of course, we present our data that the local rate of child cancer is much higher than elsewhere. And the media picks up on this. They pick up much more on a child with cancer or thyroid cancer than with graphs that I show. It is, you have to understand that we are truly harming our own people. It is, and not only it may be seen as a good business deal for some, but we are losing enormous amounts of money in treating these people, and losing them to death sometimes. I think that's where the the message has to be presented.
Can
Thank
I add
you.
a PS to that, just because we are in Iowa? And this is a conversation that goes round and round and round, because we have some of the worst environmental contaminants and the worst rates of cancer in this state. And so it needs to be even more nuanced. And I really do believe the question is, we know this about it. We're fighting to figure out, to stop all these other known sources of cancer. Why would we want to engage in bringing in yet more risk? We already face so many risks, and it is so costly and is so frightening to so many families across the state. And so that would be the nuanced presentation, I would think, to this, because to date, nobody is stopping the pesticide companies. Nobody is stopping the fertilizer companies. Nobody is stopping the major hog confinements. So we've just got to come up with new approaches to these known problems, and certainly not to introduce yet more risk to an already risk-prone state and population.
I think that's so powerfully said. Thank you for that. And so we have one more question. And it kind of goes along with these same guidelines of, those that were affected by Duane Arnold when it was operating, were there any safeguards in place? If they were to restart it, are there any safeguards in place? Do we know if there's safeguards in place?
There are safeguards in place, but still, to operate a reactor must release some portion of that highly toxic radioactive waste into the air, into the water, or it gets into the body through breathing, eating, and drinking. It has to.
And the new proposals by this administration are to burn ever more fossil fuels. And clearly Iowans are already suffering from burning more coal than most states. And so we really are in a pickle in Iowa. And I think Duane Arnold just pushes us over the edge. I swear to God. They want to kill us. When you ask why do they want to promote all these deadly substances, it goes back to the money. And the word has got to get out about how we're all being duped and used and misused and put at risk.
There are safeguards through the NRC regulations, but they have been pretty drastically pulled back by the president's executive order.
And just one final comment. A lot of what we've presented has not been good news at all. We are not all doomed, and I'm talking specifically in the nuclear area. Years ago, in the 1950s and early 60s, there was a nuclear weapons race, which included hundreds of nuclear weapons explosions, like we saw in the movie Oppenheimer, into the atmosphere, which went all around the planet and got into people's bodies through rainfall and through then the food chain. In 1963, the US and the Soviet Union signed a test ban treaty, banning all above ground tests. And we have, the official vital statistics showed right off the bat, the infant death rates and the cancer rates in young children plunged. All right, that treaty probably saved millions of lives. All right, it can be done, and it was only passed because a lot of grassroots organizations and people were just very frightened for their children. All right, and they let Kennedy and Khrushchev know, and they let the generals know, and finally it was passed. So we can do the same by phasing out nuclear power, and at least reduce this terrible menace of cancer to our society.
Thank you for ending that on a not so negative note. I appreciate that. And thank you so much. If there's any other questions, put them in the chat box now. Feel free to raise your hand. But otherwise, if you send a question and we didn't get to it, I'll send it to our panelists and we'll get an email response to you. But thank you again to everybody that joined us today. Thank you to each of our panelists. You guys are all incredible and so knowledgeable. I can't thank you enough for everything going on in your brains and just sharing that with us. So thank you again. Have a fantastic Friday, everybody. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you again next Friday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.